Hi, this is Dave Chambers, Dave the Wine Merchant. To my subscribers and to new guests, hello and welcome. We have a guest today, Kwaw Amos. Kwaw like wow with a K, which I like. Makes it easy for me to remember how to say it. And when you think of wow and winemakers, there are a number that come to mind, and this may be the next one for you because he's doing some very interesting things with regard to climate change and sustainability. And climate change, as everybody knows, is a huge deal in the wine industry. It is upsetting old standards and creating new ones, and upsetting old varieties. And it is incumbent upon us to find the new ones. So I'm going to have Kwaw introduce himself, tell you a little bit about his very interesting background and how a very unlikely path into the wine world happened. Kwaw, tell us your story, please.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much for having me, Dave. And thank you to your listeners for listening. My journey into the wine world is a very long and storied history. It actually started when I was about 11 or 12. I discovered that you could take fruit and make liquor, and it blew my mind. And I ended up doing a science fair project, and I won the town science fair. And it's been a love affair ever since. And then my love affair with wine specifically started, more specifically, started in college. That's when I really started appreciating good wine and not the cheap stuff that college kids drink. I started appreciating some of the great stuff and started learning more about wine. And from there, it just became a love affair where I was studying more, trying to intern at wineries where I could, blogging, all those type of things. And that almost led up until about my late 20s. I decided to go to business school and I started kind of shifting and concentrating a little bit more on my financial career. However, I still embraced wine. I still drank, I still studied it, I still loved it, and I still blogged about it. And I did media, and I even started doing a little bit of consulting. Then finally, around 2012, I got the idea. I was like, well, I have an idea. I saw a disconnect between where I felt a lot of producers were and a lot of where the end customers were. Because wine is aspirational, it has many attributes to it, but it's also a very visceral and soulful and natural thing that fits into our daily lives. And the more you can speak to that, I think the more powerful it becomes. And as a producer, the more in tune you become to the consumer. And so for me, that became a disconnect that I felt I could fill, not only in terms of how we market wine, how we think about wine, but also in terms of palates. I felt that you have what I call the modern wine drinker that has a very wide breadth of palate and can enjoy a wine from Burgundy and Bordeaux, or can enjoy a Barolo, but also in turn around can enjoy a Yellowtail, or a nice cab from from Cali, or something from Argentina. You have this very wide palette, and because great wine is being made all over the world, that people who embrace wine now, I think, introduce it with a sophistication and a sophisticated palate and a manner that we may not have had in the past. And again, that's not about establishing a higher water level and saying you only have to drink this and this is good wine. It's about, no, you go out and find the great wine that you love. And it's not about what anybody else tells you. And to me, that's what I construct as the modern wine drinker. And so in 2012, I started embarking on creating what was called Ozone Wine Cellars.
Say it again.
Ozone Wine Cellars. It's spelled O-S-O-N, Wine Cellars. That was the original name for the winery, which was actually named after my West African heritage. And I started creating wine under that. My first project was something called Unity, which is really about reconciliation and harmony, racial reconciliation and harmony, in conjunction with nature, as well as reconciliation between man and nature. It's just really about kind of personifying what makes great wine, which is a harmony between the process and the people and the land. And only when those things are in harmony can you produce great wine. And so wine serves as an example, not only for how we should treat ourselves and nature, but also how we should treat each other. And that was my first project. And then that kind of progressed. And in around 2017, I started Gotham Winery. And I kind of pulled the two together. And I still make wine under the Ozone label, but I kind of enveloped that into Gotham. And Gotham was a little more commercial venture and focusing on what I talked about before, the disconnect, and thinking about ways to align marketing and thought process around making wine. And that's where we are now. So that's my journey.
I love it. So Gotham, obviously named after New York City,
Absolutely.
which is where you are from.
Yes. So where I live now, I've lived here for years, but I grew up in Connecticut, so I wouldn't
Connecticut.
want to, yeah, which is still the New York area, but not, I cannot say I'm a tried and true born New Yorker.
Well, that only matters to New Yorkers, honestly. Uh, those of us outside of the metro area there consider you a New Yorker. You live there now, so that's it. Kyle, tell us, you were telling me in our intro chat before we started this about an op-ed that you wrote, and I think it was called Burning Vines.
Burning wine. Yeah.
Burning wine, not
Yes.
Burning Man.
No,
Which
it
is
was
very
actually
different
Burning
activity.
Man, Burning Wine. It literally came from the Burning Man concept. That's exactly right. So
Is that
put those
right?
two together. Yes, yes,
So
yes.
tell us
I got
about that.
So that was an op-ed I was asked to do to kind of talk about the effects of climate change on wine and what we're seeing. I think for us in the wine industry, and I'm sure you're involved and you've heard, many different things. Wine and climate change have been linked for years now. It's not something that's going to happen. It's something that's been happening, and it's been something that wine producers have been dealing with and struggling with. Much been written about this, but for me, it's important for me to get my voice out there and kind of give my angle and my thought process on what sustainability and what climate change meant for me and my winery, and what the steps that I took. Because for me, it was an important step in creating Gotham, and then some of the people we partnered with. The biggest reason why we chose some of those partners was because of climate change and sustainability. So it's something that's very important for me.
Interesting. So when you say choosing partners, you mean the growers?
Growers, but also production facilities. So when we partner in terms of renting production facilities or working with a winemaker that makes sense, we wanted to work with facilities that were actually green, that were powered with renewable energy, things like that.
So let's give a shout out to that facility. Who are you using?
So Hunt Country, that's my partner.
Country.
Yes, they're in Branchport, New York.
Okay.
They make wonderful wines of their own. Shout out to the winemaker there, Greg Hausbach. They're doing wonderful things. They're the most sustainable winery, I would believe, probably in the country, but definitely in New York State. They have a large solar array, 350 panels. They're doing wonderful things around EV charging, around certifying organic in terms of crop, how they do the soil. It was one of the very interesting aspects of climate change that I think a lot of people ignore, and something we can talk about a little more is with the growing humidity, and so you have some of these cooler climates that can grow wine that they couldn't. But also what you introduced are pests, right? Yeah. And when we think about wine, you have to remember that a phylloxera epidemic, right, almost destroyed all of European wine, and that was a pest, right? And so people think about heat and just you're gonna get rid of, but there are these microscopic adversaries that you face with climate change as well. That could be much more ruinous than any degree change in weather. And so one of the things that becomes part of climate change is thinking about how you're going to deal with that. And a lot of people employ pesticides. One of the things great that Hunt Country is introducing are different methods around crop cover, around how they treat the soil to minimize pests without having to do more pesticides. And so when we linked with them, it became a no-brainer. If I can produce with as little environmental impact as possible, and obviously I source from families. In terms of the grapes I use, I try to source from families that that grow sustainably as well. Linking those two together became exactly what I wanted to do. As we've seen recently, the changes that are happening in our environment, and we're seeing what happened recently in Niagara County in New York, and we're seeing fires. I felt it was time to start speaking up about it.
For those of us that aren't familiar with the wine world, maybe as much as you and I are, can you describe for us what's happening in Niagara?
So Niagara County is a smaller wine growing region in New York State. It's a cooler growing region, but it's a growing wine region, and you get a lot of great things like ice wine and things like that out there. But you have one of the other hidden aspects of climate change. Now you would think, okay, Niagara, it's going to be warmer now. They can produce certain wines better. No, what happens is you have climate volatility, and so one day, one year it's great. You have great, you have a great vintage. Next year, you're getting frost into May or something like that. And what happened in Niagara, which people actually believe it was triggered by the fires in Oregon, is that you had a massive violent hailstorm. And you had hail and actually flooding just happened within a span of 24 hours. And that destroyed massive amounts of vegetation and vineyards, right? Because if you have hail, if you have hail this big, that's going to just come down, and that's destroying homes. It's violent, and we've never seen anything like that before. You're having these 100-year storms every 2 to 3 years, right?
Every few years, yeah.
Every few years.
Those centuries are going by inconveniently quickly,
very fast. We're all aging fast, and you had all these farmers lose this year's crop. It's very, very sad. It's very, very sad.
And Niagara is known for its ice wines, where it's necessary to actually, I believe, they require that you actually pick them in the vineyard and not freeze them in the winery.
That's right.
In the traditional sense of the old world. I know many of the new world producers of ice wine, quote unquote, will bring the grapes in and then freeze them in a stainless steel container. Well, a question for you then is climate change as it leads to this weather volatility that you've described is going to favor some parts of the world and disadvantage others. I know Napa is deeply concerned about their ability to continue growing world-class Cabernet Sauvignon in a rising temperature environment. And they are desperately and rapidly looking for alternatives to Cabernet Sauvignon. And I know you and I had talked in advance via email. I don't know if you are familiar with Randall Graham's project called Popolochum.
I am not.
It is interesting. And if I may, I'm going to steal the screen here for a minute. There's the Grand Master himself, and he's posed out there in Popolochum, his vineyard, which is named after the native family's word for the area. And it's an interesting project. He is trying to experiment with so many different grape varietals and with new clonal varietals to come up with something that is truly American and truly adapted to our changing world. And so we have these, some would say far out there geniuses trying to come up with the lightning strike of eureka moment. And then we also have those that are just trying to find a sustainable path forward. Kwaw, I'd like to see if I can get you back to a discussion of some of the sustainable aspects that you had just started to hit on with some cover crops and how cover crops can actually lead to what we call beneficial bugs.
Yeah. And
the beneficial bugs are those that help us maintain our vineyard health. Can you just talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think that's a very important topic because again, I don't think a lot of people understand pesticide use and how pervasive it has become. Now, a lot of studies show that a lot of pesticide usage doesn't actually make it into wine. That's fine, and most likely judicious use, it's fine. And I think, but what farmers are able to do are grow several types of crops together, certain types of trees, certain types of flowers that bring in insects that you prefer. What we call those are cover crops in the sense that by uniting and you creating an ecosystem that's more friendly for insects, an ecosystem that's more friendly for bees, and for birds. And so what happens is sometimes what you get in some of these type of cover crops, so you get the birds come in and the birds will eat a lot of pests. You get the bees coming in and you have that whole pollination aspect going in on as well. And so what you're getting a more resistant crops because you're having proper pollination happening year after year. And so that kind of cycle, right? When you can bring in this harmony, when you bring in predators that will actually eat pests, and you're creating stronger, more resistant. And also you can kind of think of the ecosystem. So kind of how the more exposed you are to different disease, the more resistant you are. Same thing with crops. So when you have a different ecosystem of different crops that you're planting, That also creates, again, more disease resistant, because what's happening is mimicking what's happening in nature. That's why you see a lot of growers now bring vines closer together, and create a stronger ecosystem within the vine system itself and the root system itself. And when you introduce other quote unquote cover crops and into that sustainable organism, you're really creating a larger organism.
It's interesting because we think about the ecosystem generally as being what we can see as humans, right? It's above the ground. And much of what you're describing is about creating an ecosystem both above and below what is visible to our naked eye. And those healthy soils are critical for all sorts of sustainability, because once the vine is strong, it can survive many of the pests and the temperature variations that come, as long as it's not hit, of course, by golf ball sized hailstones.
Yeah, that's important.
You know,
and they talk to each other, right?
They do, yeah.
Right. There's been research recently done a lot of this about how these trees and plants, they talk to each other in many different ways, and they help breed sustainability within that itself.
There's a lot more communication going on than we are aware of, right? Yeah. So one of the other things that I wanted to hit on was a website I'd like to draw your attention to. If you haven't seen it before, I'm guessing you have. This is Gotham Winery. This is a beautiful site, Kwaw. You did a nice job here. Who's your designer?
Oh, just a buddy of mine from college, a buddy of mine named Antoine. He actually does SEO and websites, and so he built that for me. So.
And of course, New York is full of all these beautiful people. Tell us about this label. Is that Unité?
Unity.
Unite? Unity.
Yes, but it's written in the French.
And tell us about the wine.
So Unity was a project I started. This is actually all California grapes. That one in particular, the Omicron, is from Lake County. And I have another one, the Alpha, that's actually has grapes from Amador County.
Interesting.
And it was a project. It was a project. It was the first thing I ever wanted to do. I come from a very religious background traditionally. Not that I'm a religious person now, but when you grow up in that kind of how should I put that, indoctrination? It's a wrong word. But you grow up in that kind of spirit in terms of your value system.
Yes.
These things are just part of who you are. As long as it's meaningful and it's part of who you like. And so for me, when you talk about reconciliation, whether it be about harmony between people or harmony between land, or just in sense of people coming together, and when they come together, nothing is impossible for them. Unity was something that was always in the back of my mind as something I would love to do. And thinking about, again, how we relate to the people that we're selling to. How do we relate to society as a whole? Making sure as producers, we're thinking about that. And again, as I mentioned before, wine is the perfect foil for that.
It is.
When we talk about, whether to have a great wine, you got to have the right weather, the sun, temperature. You got to have, the right rootstock. You got to have the right pests, right? You got to pick it at the right time. Right? How quickly do you get it? You got to have the right yeast. You got to have a good winemaker, the enologist, that kind of thinks about all these things. How you choose to bottle, how do secondary fermentation. There's so much that goes in that. And to have a great wine, that's all got to be together. And if it's not working, if something in that link is broken, your wine is not going to be a great wine. And that is a perfect example for togetherness in human nature, right? Without a perfect link of unity and harmony between ourselves, we can't achieve and be the best we can be. And that's what unity symbolizes. So it's taking the best aspects of wine and linking that to our own human concept. And again, even further in terms between our relationship between ourselves and nature. So that was the concept behind it.
I like it.
And I think it's the Omicron. I love it. It's my favorite wine now. I'm going to end up drinking most of it, I feel like. We actually laid that down. So the wine from that came from Lake County. We actually laid that down for about 3 or 4 years in the bottle to kind of soften the tannins. It wasn't where I felt it should be. The Alpha we were producing yearly, but that first vintage is now just coming out. So this is the first vintage of that Omicron. I'm very, very proud of it.
Well, I'm pleased that you have discovered Lake County, which I think is a soon to be exploding, but yet undiscovered gem. It's
Absolutely.
volcanic soils. It's red, and it's got areas that are black like obsidian, and just the iron content. And it's a wonderful area. And more Napa wineries are bringing in Lake County fruit up to that 25% in their Cabernet Sauvignon that they're allowed to bring in and still, have it be called, or I'm sorry, up to the 85% and still have it called Napa. So yes, wonderful wine. What is the price on this? What do you charge for this, Kwaw?
So the Omicron is about 28. The Alpha is about 23.
So very good price points for the near mass market, what I would call the luxury market. And you're opening a wine bar too?
Yes. So that's hopefully for Q4. That'll be something that I've been planning to. COVID actually knocked those plans back. This should have opened a year and a half ago, but hopefully we'll get it up. It's been tough trying to figure out the right space and thinking about how the city is opening. But now that things are opening again, obviously Delta is a little scary, but hopefully we charge for it. And we're looking at Q4 for that to open up, and hopefully that could be a place where we can connect with customers directly and to kind of sell our vision and talk about a lot of the same things that we're talking about. Do classes, do a lot of our events there. We love to do events, so doing some things like that there, we're very excited about it.
I think that's going to be great for you. Keep me posted. I'd like to see it next time I'm out in New York. And then one last thing, your wine society. Is this just a quarterly club, monthly? Tell us what this is.
Yeah, so it's a club I designed. It was a quarterly club. We had to actually close it down because we were just getting so many people actually joined. More people joined than we were able to anticipate or deal with. So we shut that down. But the whole thing about our wine society is not so much only about distribution and shipment, but it's about the events. It's about getting together and sharing wine and doing the things that we love. And so for us, whether it be trips to wine country, whether it be yoga and wine or whatever it may be, it's a chance to not only be part of or get wine that you love, but be part of something that's bigger and that you can share with other people. So it's as much of an event club as it is a wine club. And
in keeping with your theme of unity, I think that's great. I think it's fantastic. That's what wine does. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's sustainable for many, many decades and centuries to come.
Hopefully, we'll see.
Kwaw, thank you for joining us today. Anything you'd like to leave us with? Any words of wisdom from you?
I would just to your listeners, for me, I would encourage them along the lines of climate change and sustainability. I would definitely encourage them to find their voices, to think about what's happening in the world, and in terms of wine, to challenge winemakers. And so when you go to your local shop, ask for sustainable wine. When you go to anywhere, you go to a restaurant, ask, is this made out of sustainable wine? And it's very different, and that's very different from natural wine, and that's very different from organic wine. It's about making things in a manner that are renewable and then appreciate and don't contribute to climate change. And so I would challenge your listeners when you go out, please think about that, and please challenge us. You guys own the bottom line. You are the purchasers. Push your local winemaker when you go out to a winery, no matter what it is. Talk about it and make sure that we're being responsible in terms of how we make wine and how we're trying to lead the challenge of climate change going into the future.
Wow, thank you for that. I appreciate it, and I second your voice. To my listeners, please vote with your dollars. Push your local merchant, push me, push your sommelier, and ask them for sustainable wines. Kwaw, thank you for joining us today. It was great to meet you via Zoom, and I'll meet you someday live and in person in New York City.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. I hope to see you again. Cheers.
Likewise. Thank you.
Cheers.